Moses, seeking the divine, fasted for 40 days and nights on the mountain. Meanwhile, the people, feeling disconnected, fashioned a golden image as their god. God urged Moses to attend to his people, yet Moses adamantly refused to claim credit for what God had achieved. He emphasized that these were not his people, they were God's people. Despite his significance, Moses wouldn't take credit for God's grace in his life. He focused on the importance of God's integrity. Even when God boasted about Job and Moses, their righteousness and humility stood firm. Moses refused to let God wipe out the people and replace them with his children, instead reminding God of the promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Selflessly, he pleaded for the people who had prevented him from reaching the promised land. Moses advocated for the people, highlighting God's promise and the potential damage to God's reputation if the promise wasn't fulfilled. Intercession, according to Moses' example, involves reminding God of his promises and staying aligned with his purposes. It's not about personal agendas but about honoring God's word and his intentions for humanity. Moses, understanding the significance of God's integrity, emphasized the importance of appealing to God's covenant and promises. Prayers and intercession, as per Moses' approach, should be in line with God's will, aiming for mercy and recalling God's promises for nations, families, communities, and leaders. It's not about personal desires but about aligning with God's intentions. Moses emphasized that the situation wasn't about the people's mistakes but about God's name, promise, and integrity. He advocated for mercy, knowing that the accusation against God's inability to keep promises would tarnish God's image. God yielded to Moses' intercession, recognizing the strength of a true intercessor. However, even after explaining his decision to Moses, God told him to stand aside and let his wrath consume the rebellious people. Moses, though aware of his human limitations, still stood his ground, advocating for mercy and not judging based on the people's wrongdoings. Moses knew the flaws of humanity and the need for mercy. He stood firm in advocating for God's leniency, realizing that judgment based on human faults would render no one blameless before God. The crux here is the importance of aligning with God's intentions, reminding him of his promises, and advocating for mercy without judging based on human flaws. Moses stood as an example of true intercession, emphasizing God's integrity over personal inclinations.